Okay, hey, thanks all of you for coming. We're so excited about this because this is an event we're having that we're not the speakers. We're going to be learning from all you guys, and so it's awesome. Anyway, and so I wanted to thank everybody for coming. If you're not familiar with our speakers, this is David Shestokas. One of the things that impresses me most about him is that he helped write the Lithuanian Constitution after they came out from under the thumb of the Soviet Union. Representative was Shawn. He's in the 8th District, been in office since 2007. He went to the same high school my dad taught at, although that was before he was born. And anyway, and he is one of the founders of, what is it, the national, or the something to do with fatherhood.
Responsible fatherhood.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, regardless of what side of the political fence you're on, that's something that we can all appreciate. And then last but not least, Bill Bergman. He's a professor at Loyola University. He teaches finance, and he used to be with the Federal Reserve as an economist, and then he also was the director of research at Truth and Accounting for 10 years. So that's why I'm like real excited to hear what everybody has to say. So I'm done. Oh, and also, please, if you want to be on our mailing list to stay up to date with what we're doing, please sign up there. And in a little while, a lady named Lorette is going to arrive, and she's from another organization called Illinois Separation, and she'll be looking for signatures on her petition. And then David Shestokas has put some books there. They're not free. The other stuff is free. One book is 20, one book is 15. Talk to him if you want to buy a book. And I'm done.
What's your name?
G.H. Merritt.
All right, thanks, GH. I want to thank all our speakers, people who come today to discuss this. This is an event that I've had brewing in my head for several years, so I'm glad it's here. Also, special thanks to GH for helping put this on with me and reaching out to some of the speakers today. And thanks to the library. They've been very accommodating, and thanks to everybody who's come out today to see this event. So at this point, we will get going. We'll have each speaker up to 15 minutes to discuss this topic, and we'll get right into it. First, we'll bring up Representative Ford to discuss this. Again, up to 15 minutes.
All
Thanks.
right. Well, thank you very much. It's always good to be in a space where people want to participate in democracy and let their voices be heard. It's good to be on the panel with a good friend. Last time we were together, we didn't drink water.
No, we didn't.
He's trying to act like he's a change and reformed person. But I'm sure I could change his mind after this to go and have a beer. So I want to thank a New Start and New State, New Illinois, for hosting this. The state of New Illinois, which I totally oppose. And I hope that after today, even the non-for-profit 501c3 will then fold its fight to be a new state, and we all be one. Have I convinced anyone yet? No. Good. So I'm also here to be aware and to learn why it's important. So of course I come with my preconceived that I believe one state together is better than a divided state. And so together I think that with all of the wealth from the southern parts, from our rural areas, add lots of value to Illinois. And I believe that our urban areas all add value. And that's why Illinois is one of the most progressive states and one state that other states and nations look at, because we do some things right. And we do more things right when we're all together. And there's no doubt we do some things right. And I'm sure that you guys could raise your hand and think of something that Illinois does right. One thing I would tell you that we do right is when you drove here today, the roads were
Terrible.
they were great. I mean, traffic, you can't complain about traffic. You can't worry about traffic, but you can say our roads are paved. Our roads are paved.
Order, please.
That's all right. They could do. You can look at this library. This is a part of state money that comes from taxpayers, from local that goes.
Order, please.
And you look at the police. We're very happy to say that we have police that protect and service. We look at the firefighters that actually serve and protect the communities. Then you look at the schools. You look at all of those things that actually, because we're together, make Illinois work. And you also look at our rail system. That's huge. I mean, we have to stick together. We're connected through the rails. We have our airports that we all share. And so I don't know what happens if we decide that we're going to separate from one another. So I'm encouraging us to be very diligent about making Illinois better. I think that's what a democracy is to do everything that you can to prove why things are not working and force it to work better. And when we do that, then we can be a better state and a leader in the nation on a lot of issues. One other thing I have to tell you, if we separate the parts of the North and the South, all those prison bodies, I'm gonna have to find prisons in Chicago and bring my people back to Chicago, and then they're gonna lose all their revenue. So I'm gonna tell you, you might not want to do that. That's a lot of revenue when you look at those jobs down there in rural parts of Illinois with those prisons, and that's an economy in itself. So thank you very much, and I look forward to learning why I should be on your side as it relates to dividing the state.
Thank you, Representative Ford. Up next, we'll have Dave Shestokas. He has up to 15 minutes to discuss New Illinois. Thanks, Dave.
Let's go, Dave. Where you at?
What's that?
I'll see you in a minute.
We'll see you in a minute. Yes, sir. Yes. And hey, there we go. Okay, we're set. So here we are today. We're going to actually, well, there's some people that are going to talk pro and con about this circumstance. Actually, I'm going to spend a little more time telling you about the history and why it is possible, how the elements of the Constitution actually apply to having this take place. And this is probably a great time to do this. I don't know if does anybody know what tomorrow is? 17th. September 17th. That's good. That's a start. What does that mean? It's Constitution Day. Yeah, that's exactly right, because September 17, 1787 was in fact the day that they finished writing the Constitution and put it out for ratification. And in terms of something where people run down our founders as a bunch of rich old white slave owners and things like that, I'd like to tell a story about the very first day, because they finished writing the Constitution, and of course they sent it out for ratification to all the states around the country, all 13 of them at the time. But of course, they wrote the Constitution in what we now call Independence Hall. And when they wrote that in Independence Hall, that was also the State House for the state of Pennsylvania. So all they had to do with the Constitution for ratification in the state of Pennsylvania was to walk it upstairs to the Pennsylvania legislature. And that very first day, the founders and the Pennsylvania legislatures ordered 4,500 copies of the Constitution to be published for distribution around the state. And what's interesting that people should know is that only 3,000 of those copies of the Constitution that they sent out that day were printed in English. 1,500 copies were printed in German. The fully one third of the population of the state of Pennsylvania in 1787 were German speakers and not English speakers. And I would suggest to you that it was important to the folks that were proposing the brand new government wanted to make sure that the people that were not English speakers understood everything that was being proposed for the government that they were living under. Shortly thereafter, they also sent it out in New York. In New York, in addition to publishing in English, before New York was New York, it was something else. It was New Amsterdam, right? And so same thing happened in New York. They published it not just in English, but both in English and in Dutch. And the folks that wrote the Constitution, from day one, started the effort of inclusivity, started the effort to bring in everybody, to make sure that everybody participated. So I think that's important for folks to know, that that's what we did on the very first day that the Constitution was written. Relatively quick, this is what I've been involved in the recent past. I wrote a couple of books. I did stuff for Trump and Rubio in the election in 2016, 550,000 illegally open ballots there. I did work for Peter Roskam. I filed the case that you may now have heard of, Illinois Conservative Union versus the Illinois State Board of Elections. Judicial Watch ultimately took that together. I did get a church opened in Morris, Illinois during the course of the pandemic. We sued and got Standing in the Word Ministries open during the course of that. I monitored the United States-Georgia runoff elections. That's a whole separate story. Before that, I also testified before the Pennsylvania Senate in the aftermath of 2020. I currently have a case that's on appeal, Fritz versus Ferry. In that case, we also have something on appeal in Lake County regarding Amendment 1, which was on the ballot, but the actual language of the amendment was not on the ballot. Very strange doings there. So we're involved in a lot of election things, and currently I represent Pastor Stephen Lee. Pastor Stephen Lee was indicted along with President Trump in Georgia, just August the 15th. And so that's a long story, and if I promised GH I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. If somebody was interested, I'll stick around and talk about Georgia and President Trump, because I'm literally involved in that case. So I'm happy to be here. But I'm also happy to be involved in a variety of things where I'm not just sitting at home throwing my shoes at the TV. We've got a lot of things going on that we have to look after. So I'm also happy to be part and parcel and involved in this. And why I'm happy to be involved in this is because the Illinois has a mission statement, of course, to educate Illinois citizens. I am so happy to have the opportunity to be part of that educational process. Whether or not you wind up with a new state or not, I think it's very, very important that people should be, in fact, be educated about the Constitution, about the possibilities of a new form of government, what kind of things we have available to us moving forward. Tomorrow, of course, is Constitution Day. Just a real quick story. About 10, 12 years ago, I wound up doing a Constitution Day presentation in a high school in Southwest Florida. I'm also licensed to practice law there, and I was there. And I started off the conversation in sophomore American history class with a simple question. Probably you guys can answer this. But I asked the students, what year was the country founded? You guys know, right?
1619.
No, nice try, though. I understand the 1619 project is out there. But, but the first answer I got was 1700. I said, no, it was after that. And then I got another answer after that, blah, blah. Sooner we zeroed in on 1776. And then I asked ultimately the kids, what day it was, and I got it all over the board, and ultimately wound up having to say hot dogs, hamburgers, fireworks, and the kids finally said July 4th. So this is the kind of thing that we're battling, and so that's one of the things that New Illinois is doing something important in terms of doing this educational aspect. In terms of doing something, I think it's important for us to, you hear all often that we have the question that says, that's not who we are as Americans. Well, who are we as Americans? Well, guess what? On July 4th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson said who we are as Americans, right? That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and I've only got 15 minutes, right? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But the fact is that they're driving their just powers from the consent of the governed, right? And that's what elections are about. That's why I'm so involved in elections. That's why the New Illinois Project has got some sort of gravitas to it, because the people that are outside of the metropolitan area of Chicago have a certain feeling that they're not being governed by their consent. They have this feeling that they're being overridden and not being governed by their consent. contrary to the precepts of the Declaration of Independence. The other thing that, we don't, government schools don't generally teach the Declaration of Independence. One of the reasons why they don't teach the Declaration of Independence is following this 55 words that I'd call the American Creed that we just talked about. Talks about essentially the right of revolution, right? It says that whenever the form of government is not fulfilling those needs, it is the right, in fact, possibly the duty of the people to overturn that. So that's built in, but these things are built into the Constitution so that we can have such changes without bloodshed, right? So that we can change, we can exercise this right of revolution through a political and / legal process, and that's why those things are in there. But this is also why the Declaration of Independence isn't taught, and it's very sorry that it isn't taught, because in fact it is what defines us as Americans. Article 4. Article 4 is in fact the mechanism by which states can separate parts of states into brand new states. That's that provision in there, but it's because of the Brothers' Revolution mechanics that are built into the Constitution. There's several of them. Article 5 has the amendment process, which is actually a revolutionary kind of process. It also has, strangely enough, impeachment is built into the Constitution, and it's built into the Constitution because Ben Franklin said, there's a good chance that this magistrate, i.e. the president, might become obnoxious, and gosh, we don't want to have to kill him. And so that's why that's why impeachment exists, so you can get rid of the president and not kill him. But that's also why Article 4 exists, so that you can make such changes without having physical revolutions. And I think that's important when you come to think about the New Illinois project, the New California project, the other things in New York and Oregon, these kind of things. That's what they exist for. They exist to avoid, enable us to make changes without being, there we go. Oh, I went backwards. Just 1 second, I'm lost here. I will tell you that I am not a Mac guy. I am a Apple, or whatever. At any rate, Article 4, Section 3, Clause 1. This is the provision by which New Illinois can come into existence, right? New states may be admitted by Congress into this union. No new state shall be formed or erected. This is the provision under which this can take place. If you note, it takes the act of the legislatures that are involved and an act of Congress for a new state to be formed from an old state, from an existing state. In the United States history, 5 times this in fact has happened. So it's not a very weird thing. It's happened 5 times in history, dating all the way back to Vermont, Kentucky, Tennessee, Maine, West Virginia. West Virginia is outlined in the New Illinois mission statement as kind of a standard or kind of an example of how this can be done. I know I made a presentation at the New Illinois State Legislature meeting earlier this year, and at that time I told them that I thought that West Virginia is not the best example that you might be able to select. Just so you know, Vermont in 1791, that became a state. It was formed out in portions of New York. And actually, Vermont, while it was admitted as a 14th state, and New York ultimately had given up its rights to the Vermont territory, New York, in fact, the New York legislature did enact that, but Vermont took a different tack, and they said, oh, well, we've always been republic, we've been free. But besides all that, the legislatures of Vermont and New York approved it, and then the Congress did that, and New York became, Vermont became the first state that was admitted under this, under these provisions. And I got to be careful what I do here. Next one, Kentucky. Kentucky happened to be originally it was part of Virginia. When Virginia had its land grant from the king, it ran all the way to the Mississippi River. And so Kentucky was part of Virginia. Virginia ultimately said, no, we can let Kentucky go. And the act of the Kentucky legislature, the Kentucky Provisional Legislature petitioned to become part of the Union, and the Congress in 1792 said, okay. Tennessee. Tennessee's kind of interesting because it was part of North Carolina, and North Carolina was part of that twice. And but
2-minute warning.
yes, sir. Well, we'll be moving along from Tennessee. There's Tennessee for you. Okay. West Virginia, Maine. Maine is. I'm going to spend my last 2 minutes on Maine, primarily because Maine, in my view, is the appropriate model. Maine, in my view, is the appropriate model. Maine, over a period of 30 years, it had been part of Massachusetts, and over a period of 30 years, had in fact voted 6 different times to leave Massachusetts and become its own state. And then over that period of time, the vote kept getting larger and larger and larger in support of Maine becoming a state. And finally, in 1820, Maine was admitted to the Union as a state. But I would also mention that as part of Maine's being admitted to the Union as a state, Missouri was also admitted. They call it the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And that was because they wanted to balance two free state senators against 2 slave state senators. And I was talking with Representative Ford before the beginning, and I was saying, for this to happen, there might be some consideration to work with someplace like Puerto Rico, right? Puerto Rico might very well be interested in becoming a state. And if you were to balance New Illinois' 2 presumably Republican senators against Puerto Rico's Republican or presumably Democratic senators, you might have a better chance of having this happen. Because in the end, while there is a constitutional legal mechanism for this to take place, it is ultimately a political process. And recognizing that it's ultimately a political process, I think, is very, very important. And there you go. That's what West Virginia is, a whole other story that goes into Civil War, and we ain't got time for that today. But in any event, thank you very much. This is the highlights. I'm in favor of the main proposition, and I again congratulate New Illinois on their efforts at education. My goodness, the people of Illinois, the people of the United States of America need constitutional education. Thank you so much. Dave Shestokas.
And so for our next speaker, Bill Bergman has 15 minutes to talk about the financial feasibility of New Illinois. So let us hear it for Bill Bergman.
Great, thank you.
Also, we got waters. If you guys are thirsty, it's a little warm down here. So we do have water. Please help yourself.
Hi, nice to meet you all. Thanks, it's nice to be here. I grew up in the Chicago area, lived here most of my whole life, except for Champaign for a few years at U of I. I grew up in the North Shore, went to Sacred Heart Grade School up in Winnetka, and one reason I'm happy to be here with my co-panelists, Representative Ford, well, my Bergman hides about 75 to 90% Irish blood. On my dad's side, the Bergman included, well, his mother was Bernadette O'Donnell, and I found out about 15 years ago why I was named William and why my grandmother never said anything about the Irish family background. I thought it was potato famine shame. I'm named after her uncle, William O'Donnell, one of Al Capone's biggest enemies in Chicago. So I have some ties to Illinois corruption. On the flip side, my mother, Janet Mary Ford, passed away my senior year in high school, no warning, an aneurysm on the tennis court. But she was a Ford, and she was a Galway Ford, and that's the other component of the Irish blood. A longer story. I've got way too much stuff. Hopefully I can, beautiful, it's gonna work. I'm gonna try to fly. This is a hard question. I'm not a necessarily pro-Illinois, new Illinois person or anti, but I'm gonna try to figure it out. And that's why we're here. I'm gonna try to help you figure it out too. Is this financially feasible? It depends. I teach finance. That's one of my first lessons for the students. The right answer in finance is it depends. Oftentimes on your assumptions, and in our case, the law and the politics, as David was talking about. The future is uncertain, including how the law evolves at the end of the day. And we'll talk about some of those uncertainties. Another way to think about this, and that's my goal here today, is to frame some questions and a way to frame understanding if this is financially feasible. And as opposed to what? Is a new Illinois financially feasible as opposed to the status quo? Maybe the status quo is not financially feasible. And Finally, would a new Illinois, here's one question I saw, would it go broke without money from Chicago? The city of Chicago is already broke, arguably, even with Chicago money.
Yeah.
And you have to distinguish between, it's always good to think about the money of the economy and the people in a city versus the financial condition of the government, which theoretically is there for us. It's the servant. It's not the king. That's what we fought against in 1776. Arguably, the state of Illinois, it's not broke technically, it's not broke legally. Bankruptcy is a legal concept, but what we're going to learn about is we're going to talk about liquidity versus solvency and the financial condition of the state. Can Illinois survive even with Illinois' own money? Illinois is losing people, lots of people. And this is just one element of thinking about this. This is from the United Van Line's annual migration study. You can see Illinois versus Indiana. Outbound shipments in Illinois beginning in 2008 have been, Illinois at leading the league in outbound migration in the United States. This is just one survey. Another one came out just yesterday or the day before. Anybody see the Allied Van Lines, another moving company? Illinois was at the top of the list of outbound migration. And I'm afraid it's not the weather. Here we are with Illinois versus Indiana. What it is the financing and the finances of the state of Illinois. And the realization that not only current taxes are a matter of concern, but what is facing future taxpayers given the amount of debt that's been accumulated, despite the fact that we have a, quote, balanced budget requirement in the Illinois Constitution. We'll get into that.
It's not intuitive.
Okay, some things to think about, and thinking about your own financial condition or the condition of a company or the condition of the government. In finance, there's a distinction between liquidity and solvency. And what is this about? Having liquidity means you have money or cash today, but solvency is about a balance sheet condition. Do you owe more or less than what you have? And there's two different ways. A longer term way to think about it, and arguably more accurate. The short-term perspective is what's gotten us in trouble, and that's the budget accounting. We're going to learn about that. But liquidity versus solvency. And in turn, from bank regulation, an area that I know pretty well, there's a concept called regulatory forbearance. What happens when the bank regulators let insolvent banks stay alive and kicking? There's an incentive to get out and swing for the fences, especially if they have taxpayer money behind them. If you have bailouts available for big banks that are insolvent, in theory the regulators should get in there quickly and resolve, and that's why we have prompt corrective action. Well, arguably and sadly, both in terms of the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, as well as, I believe, both our state and federal governments, you and I, as citizens and taxpayers, haven't been doing our job of taking care of our money and how it's been abused. And we'll talk about that, I think, from Illinois' perspective. So here are some things. Depending on the law, here are some concepts to think about. Virginia versus West Virginia was brought up. One thing to remember about that case that came out of that case that's relevant for us, and again, I'm not a pro or con New Illinois, but I'm thinking about it, and that's the fact that in this case, the state of West Virginia had to assume a, quote, just percentage of the debts of the old entity. And how do you determine what is or isn't a just percentage of these debts, which are in the hundreds of billions of dollars in Illinois? That's one uncertainty that's out there. In addition, another one that's kind of fun, the law of water rights is fascinating. The Great Lakes Compact, this makes Lake County kind of important, I believe, on the whole question of New Illinois. But for instance, the city of Chicago recently entered into a deal with Joliet to sell water. And they got lots of money to the city of Chicago because Chicago was given an exception from the original agreement not to draw down the Great Lakes. Anyway, the Great Lakes Compact is something to watch. Another one, I'm not going to show it right now because I don't have enough time, but the law matters. Well, what law matters? In Illinois, the statute is the Illinois Municipal Code. This is the law governing state and city financial relationships. I challenge you to go look at it when you go home tonight and start scrolling down. Make sure you don't look at the table of contents. Look at the actual entire act on that page. And when you start scrolling down, you're going to realize that it goes on forever. And to what extent we have this massive legal complex surrounding us, that's part of our cost of government in Illinois, that perhaps a new clean slate would be an interesting possible outcome. The law, what is it? The rule of law in theory is a defense against tyranny. I'm afraid sometimes we have to think about to what extent the risk is that it becomes a tool, not a defense against tyranny. Along those lines, here are three people in happier days. On the left, we have a member of the Illinois Supreme Court. In the center, we have the former CEO of ComEd. And on the right, we have the chair of the Finance Committee of the legislature, the city council of the city of Chicago. And the two of them are now in significant legal jeopardy. This is where the people that we have chosen and allowed to be elected to lead the finances and the law governing the finances of the state of Illinois. Here's another face. I can't resist. I fell in love with this guy. Recently, I did a chapter in a new book about the Chicago School of Economics, and my chapter was about this fellow, Paul Douglas, former senator from Illinois, and a fabulous, a liberal's liberal, but at the same time, when it came to fiscal conservatism, he was iron as a rock. He was fabulous. He took care and wanted to take care of the public purse. One of the ironies is that while he was at Chicago as an economist, he became a member of the city council in Chicago and fought against corruption, including corruption in utility regulation and utilities. And here we are today with a disaster financially for both the state and the city, and reaping the fruits of the corruption associated with that financial disaster. It's ironic. Well, this fellow is a fun character to learn about. He wrote a book called Ethics in Government. I recommend to everyone. So where do we go to learn about government finances? How do we learn about this stuff? Credit ratings, budgets, audited financial statements. Here's three different places to go to see what the finances are. I've got question marks on all three of them. Credit ratings. One of my favorite law review articles was subtitled "The Siskel and Ebert of Financial Markets." 2 thumbs down for the credit rating agencies. They're not necessarily trustworthy, a long story. Who do they work for? The issuer of the instruments, the bonds, and they get paid by those folks. Is it possible we can't necessarily rely on credit ratings but everybody pays attention to it, certainly the media does, and yet the market really moves before the credit ratings, not vice versa. I sat in on a conference once, and the rating agency talked about the first thing they stressed about municipal bonds was their fundamental respect for, quote, sovereign debt, which is what, we'll see why that gets me energized in a minute. But the idea is that they're different from businesses. Why? Because they can tax you and take your money away. Well, that makes them different. Does that make that good for taxpayers that they have a good credit rating? Budgets, a long story. The budgets are all over the place in the media. People pay attention all the time. There's a lot of attention to budgets as opposed to what really matters, in my opinion, and that's audited financial statements. The budgets, well, one reason why they're worth being skeptical about is that there are words and there are deeds. Budgets are prospective, forward-looking documents with plans for the future that may or may not happen. They're kind of painting pictures about what's coming in the future. They're based largely on cash basis accounting principles, which can be manipulated to show surpluses that aren't necessarily surpluses. They're the means by which we, quote, balance our budget, and we'll see some data here shortly on that aren't really balanced. And finally, all the attention on budgets, I'm afraid, is a symptom of a deeper problem. People care more about spending money in government than they do accounting for it and taking care of it. We need to take care of it better than we have. And the audited financial statements come out afterwards, and they let you know. Trouble is, they come out a long time afterwards. They're pretty slow coming out with this stuff, especially in Chicago and Illinois. Illinois' latest financial statements are for fiscal year ended June 2022, more than a year ago, a year that ended more than a year ago. At least we got the information now, but that's a long time ago. We didn't get those statements until a month ago. The debts on those statements are based on actually the pension numbers in those statements are from June 30, 2021. A long time ago. Well, anyway, but the audited financial statements are where to go, I think, for the most reliable, at least not timely, but reliable material. And one thing to look at, and we're about to see it, is the unrestricted net position. That's all assets minus liabilities gives you what's left over. Like with companies, you have balance sheets, and the shareholder equity, our equity as citizens and taxpayers, is in this unrestricted net position. Here it is in Illinois. Since 2005. This big drop here, they recognized pensions they previously didn't recognize. This big drop here, they recognized other retirement benefits for employees that they put, and here we have a flattening out, but what's happened in the last 3 years that's been beneficial that can't be counted on for Illinois and Chicago?
Federal COVID money.
Federal government's been raining money down on us. That is not, for political as well as other reasons, not necessarily reliable. Here's Illinois versus Indiana and Utah, two responsible actors keeping it close to the edge and zero,
Wow.
a flat net position. Here it is per capita, the same picture. Granted, Illinois is bigger, but it's pretty ugly. This is ugly. This is the unfunded pension liability. Here's Illinois way out here in terms of both the extent to which those pensions are funded. They haven't funded them. Why can't we count on the federal government? I'm going to skip through this. Can we count on Uncle Sam to keep us whole? Here's the balance sheet of the U.S. government. No one's seen this except you have now. No one reads this. and here it is. $5 trillion in assets, $39 trillion in liabilities. What's left over? Net position, negative 34. That's not even including Social Security and Medicare. This is not a pretty picture, a longer story. I like to do simple things sometimes. This is the number of times the word unsustainable appears in the annual financial report of the United States government, because they're spilling more ink on trying to figure out why it isn't sustainable.
Time.
Perfect.
If you want to finish your bit about Alfred E. Newman, go ahead.
Okay, this is a good point to bring up. That balance sheet we just saw, it's introduced with the following comforting sentences. There are, however, other significant resources available to the government that extend beyond the assets presented in these balance sheets. Those resources include, and this is where I get interested, the stewardship PP&E, in addition to the government's possessive S, sovereign powers to tax and to set monetary policy. Thank you for giggling. We should be comforted that our government can take our money away and can inflate the value of the dollar away. Our government's going to be okay. Well, if that's what we're counting on in Illinois, I could talk about this fellow, but New Illinois, I believe, is something out-of-the-box way to think, and I think it's healthy to be thinking. I don't know if it's a good thing to do or not, but I appreciate the initiative. And have a good one.
All right. So we'll move into the next portion of our program here. We will have a little moderated discussion. I'll start off by asking each panelist if they wanted to respond to something that somebody said during their remarks, and we'll start with Representative Ford.
No, I think everyone here agrees that this is something that we should be doing as a democracy. And I think you said it, and it's all about educating. So that's why I'm here. to make sure that I could listen and be convinced about the changes that are needed in the state of Illinois.
All right, same question. Let's, Dave, did you want to answer that question?
Sure. I do think that it is certainly something worth looking into. I also think that sometimes people look at the politics and not also some of the practical things that Bill pointed out. It is certainly worthwhile to, he mentioned the cases from relative to West Virginia and the 1911 case that talked about the equitable division of the debt, which is something that needs to be considered during the course of this. I think he made a major statement involved in that.
Same question for Mr. Bergman.
Thanks to both panelists, and I'm just reacting again to David. I emphasize with my students the importance of trying to understand the law and how it is interpreted and how it is evolving over time is critical to understanding financial risk and reward.
All right, thanks. So we'll start the same order. We'll have to figure this out, won't we?
Okay, we'll just pass through the front?
Yeah, we'll pass through the front this time. Okay. So this next question, we learned a lot the constitutional process, the feasibility. Is there a possibility that a new Illinois could be a win-win for New Illinois and Chicagoland? We'll start with Representative Ford, same order that we just did.
I would say until I learn better, I would say no. It's not possible for it to be a win-win under any circumstances.
Why?
Well, we'll get there. Okay, well, it's up to you. That was one question. It didn't say why. It just said, is it possible? It's not common sense. The common sense is
we'll have
the question that was asked. The question was, will it be a win-win? My answer was no.
Okay.
Now,
I thought
I'll let him tell me when I can.
We will have a Q&A audience participation portion, so let's hold all that to the end if we could, please. Dave, go ahead.
In the very short term, there is some sort of possibility of that because now we have 11 million people that have 2 senators, in which case we would have 11 million people that now have 4 senators. And doubling the representation in the United States Senate for the general population of Illinois, I think might very well be a win-win for the people of Illinois.
I'm going to assert that it can't be a, quote, win-win, but maybe not for what you're thinking. With anything this disruptive, there isn't going to be only winners. There's going to be winners and losers, and that's why people may not want this to happen.
All right. So we'll start with Representative Ford. This one's specifically a question for you. Is there other Democrats? I mean, you're at this point in the game not for it, but are there any Democrats in Illinois that may support something like this that you're aware of?
Support the conversation, I would say yes.
Support the conversation or actually
I don't even think
supporting
that it's supporting the change and the separation. People in this room that want it to happen are educated enough to be willing to vote on it to say, let's separate and have 2 states here. I mean, if we had to take the vote today, who's educated enough right now to say yes? I don't think anyone is. So I'm here, and I believe other Democrats will be willing to listen to see what's best.
All right, thank you. Do any other panelists want to comment on that question or respond?
My only one good Democrat friend is sitting here. For me to be in a position to comment on that, my only other really good friend that is well in favor of that is, of course, he's a Republican, is Representative Dan Calkins down in, and I think he's one of the sponsors of this movement down in the state legislature. And I appreciate what Dan wants to do, but I do believe that there are probably some downstate / moderate Democrats who, in representing their constituents, would certainly want to take a hard look at it. Yes, I believe there would be.
Mr. Bergman, do you want to comment?
Sure. I guess one thing I maybe emphasize is that in the world of political science, there's a group called the Public Choice School of Economics, where they realize, or they try to assert, that people that are running government may be like the rest of us. We're all trying to make ourselves better off. And because government servants maybe are working for themselves, not necessarily directly for the whole, the common good, that special interest groups tend to drive the bus. And the fact that, and that's where education becomes very important, especially for the common average Joe and Jane.
All right. This question will be directed at Mr. Shestokas. Would New Illinois inherit the laws and regulations of Illinois upon separation? If so, how do you envision a process of, how does the law get,
Sure. How
laid
does the law
down?
transition? How does the law transition from
Right.
that standpoint? And it's actually, we've got a pretty good model that goes with the start of the country. With the start of the country, when the new states adopted their constitutions, they adopted the common law of England as it existed in 1776 as the basis of their law going forward. And I would suggest that New Illinois' constitution would, in fact, do the same in terms of adopting the laws of the state of Illinois as they exist on the date of their existence, and then obviously reserve the right to create their own common law going forward, create their own legislature and common law going forward. But there is actually models for doing such a thing. It's not chaotic whatsoever in terms of making such transitions. In fact, the very first law of the state of Illinois, when it came into business in 1818, in fact, did adopt the common law of England as it existed in 1776 as the basis of the law of the state of Illinois when it went into business in 1818. So it's not that's really not a huge problem. The new Constitution of Illinois would, in fact, I'm sure, quite do that right off the beginning.
All right. Any other of the panelists wanted to comment on that point?
I guess I'd be hesitant about adopting the current legal constitution and or statutes that we have, given they're the product of what got us to where we are today.
Well, if I might comment on that, relative to the general legal structure and statutes as they exist and the common law as it's been developed in the Illinois courts is what I suggest. But the fact is that New Illinois would adopt and have its own constitution from day one. Mm-hmm. So it would have a brand new constitution from the beginning, from day one, and that constitution ultimately would have to be approved by the Congress of the United States.
Yeah. But his point is, if it's good now and you're going to take it over to the new state, we might as well fix what we got instead of separate.
You started with the premise if it's good now.
It's good enough to take.
If a new constitution is in New Illinois' future, I think the statutory framework would have to be started over.
All right. This next question is for Mr. Bergman, or is it Dr. Bergman?
Mr. Thank you.
Mr. Okay. I didn't want to be, how would debt and other, assets be divided? How do you envision that sort of process if New Illinois were to come into existence?
It's such a hard question. One thing that's interesting, I'll just react to it, is the reaction from when banks, you have a chance to liquidate banks and extinguish debts. To what extent New Illinois is an opportunity, possibly, for a harsh and draconian, potentially valuable extinguishment of debt that we have incurred on our behalf.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Well, I know that there are people throughout the state that have a pension obligation that the state had to continue to pay the pension. So what happens to those pension obligations?
That's
I mean,
a good question.
People that right now, will they continue to have health care because the new state may say, we don't want to have Obamacare? Will people then lose their health care? There's just so many things that we look at that has a economic impact.
Yeah, thank you.
On the issue of pensions, that's among the problems we have right now with the current Illinois Constitution. the Illinois Constitution does not allow for pension reform. It's for all practical purposes. The pensions are locked in.
Diminished.
It can't be diminished. It really can't be adjusted. The legislative hands are tied in terms of pension activities. And so that would be among the advantages going forward of a new constitution for 6 or 7 million people of the new state of Illinois.
And remember one thing, when those people from the rural parts of Illinois leave and they no longer pay into that pension system could collapse. We have to continue to be in it together in order to protect it. We're not, I'm not gonna, the lack of sounding unaware, it's bad, but we're gonna make it.
Yeah, well, okay, we can go into that, but actually, how much of the pension money from Illinois we're sending to folks in Florida and elsewhere right now, because there's people live in Florida and Costa Rica and everywhere else. But
All right, well, I want to ask one more question specifically to Representative Ford before we open it up to audience questions. You've had the conversation, thank you. You've been very, vocal about having this conversation. You have strong opinions. Based on what you've heard today, if a resolution was brought before General Assembly, would you co-sponsor or vote for said resolution? See, that goes that question we gotta always ask. A resolution that says what? So the past we haven't had it this session, but in previous sessions we actually had the resolution come up. I think the first resolution was more of like, let's cut Chicago out, and I think the second resolution was maybe I'm wrong, but we've had I am right. Okay, the first, but we've had a couple. And I think this is actually the first step in the process to get going, if I'm not mistaken, for this whole process. So, and I think, and Brad has introduced it both times, is that correct?
He introduced it that old way in 2018, that's before he was at all involved with us.
Okay.
And so 2019, 2020 or 21, he introduced it the way it is now, and it's just listing the reasons why the other counties should be a separate state.
So based on what you've heard today, would you support or co-sponsor said resolution?
I would say, until reading it, I would say I don't know. But what I would tell you, what I would co-sponsor is a resolution to study the benefits. And now, if you guys want to start there and we take a tour around and figure out the benefits, I could support that. Because I believe I can make the case that Illinois, if we continue to do this type of stuff, we could become stronger because people that have opinions and willing to fight for it, we could change public policy to make it better. So I'm all for the discussion and the task force or resolution aiming towards even talking about it. I think it's okay. I'm not afraid of that conversation.
All right, thank you. So we'll open it up to questions. We'll start with you.
Just a question, because I know we say that our pensions are in crisis.
Would you want to? This is a long mic. Yeah, we got plenty of room. So.
Oh, sorry. I'm not used to talking in these things. But you say we all know. One of the reasons we're all angry is because our pensions, the money spent. So why can't we just do resolution? Why is there such a problem doing a resolution to our Constitution to fix the pensions so that people who do work like me don't have to leave when I retire because I can't afford my tax bill?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not, the problem with doing, you could do a resolution, but what we found is the Constitution, we would need to change the Constitution in order to, and if we did that, believe it or not, there's a possibility that those with pensions today, they could lose them. Because what people want when you talk like that, they want bankruptcy. I'm against bankruptcy, and that means everyone loses their pension.
But we're all losing now. I mean, I can't afford my tax bill. My mom had to sell her house because she can't live on Social Security.
Well, that's one thing at a time.
I know.
I think that it's very important to know why I feel the way I feel about that part. Now, what are we going to do about fixing so that we could stop the taxes from going up? That's another discussion. But when you talk about going to the pension problem, the Constitution says you can't diminish it, and also if the states that want to divide, some people want to see the state fail as far as bankruptcy, and I don't.
All right, next question. We'll go with this woman, and then we'll go back to this, down this way.
Because I'm new to this, can you just tell me, this resolution, is it Cook County versus every other county? That's what I'm not clear on.
I think in the
That's why I
resolutions
can't
previous,
vote on
it was the city of Chicago specifically, right? Go ahead.
That was the first time Brad filed the resolution. What it is now is that this is addressing an urban versus rural issue. And so it would essentially be, what's the will of the people? Chicago wouldn't be eligible to be a part of New Illinois because it's urban versus rural. But other than that, it's what do the people want? Now, Lorette just came in a little later. She's with Illinois separation referendum. That's been on the ballot in 27 counties in southern Illinois, and it's passed by a landslide in each one. So we know at least that segment of the state is on board with it. But especially when you get up to the collar counties, you're going to have to look at it township by township because it's not, it's not that cut and dry. There's townships in Cook County that have tried to leave Cook County in the past. They had a referendum, it passed. They were not able to go forward because the cost of litigation with Cook County would have been prohibitively expensive. So it's just going to be something working on the state probably, I would imagine, all the way up to I-80 and all the way up to Wisconsin and Western Illinois. You're going to have people on board. It's just going to, take some time to figure out in the collar counties and in the fringe of Cook County who's part of it.
All right, who else has got a question? I think you had a question, sir?
Can I comment on that
Yeah.
for just a second?
Yeah.
Just in terms of who it is and how it gets broken up, we're presuming that a resolution in the General Assembly will in fact set forward a definition. As GH just indicated, it more or less is going to be kind of like a local referendum if folks want to join or not. And that is, in terms of one of the reasons I try and tell people about history, is there is history in how this kind of works. And that's exactly how they did it in Maine. I point to this Maine thing that it's worth studying because little by little there was more and more sections of Maine that were voting for it until they ultimately defined what the new state was. And the definition of the new state didn't come from the legislature in Massachusetts. The definition of the new state came from the people that wanted to leave Massachusetts. Okay, so I suggest that if you want to do this, the Illinois separation group that they're working on, those are the kind of people that also be part of and hook up with, because that's how the process will work. You don't want to dictate it from Springfield and have Springfield say, this is it, and that's where you go. That's not the consent of the governed. Okay, I love the Declaration. I always refer back to that. And the fact is that's how the main process, how that main process worked, is a great model, and that's over 30 years they developed who wanted to leave.
All right, thank you. You had a question, sir?
Just wondering if we're reaching out to other states, like you mentioned, Maine, Massachusetts, and I think the Pacific Northwest. Like Idaho is trying to do the same thing, trying to separate from Oregon. Would it benefit us to work in tandem in conjunction with other states?
Yes.
Well, that kind of a process, besides requiring the consent of your state legislature, requires the consent of a second state legislature. But the problem with us is that Illinois has the worst financial health of all 50 states. We have that enormous debt, and so Indiana's running a surplus of like $4 billion. And so none of the states around us would want to take us with our evil dowry.
Any other, who's else got questions?
How would that work? I heard about Oregon, people in rural Oregon wanting to separate from Portland, and they're just trying to get Idaho to annex them.
Yeah.
Why do they have to accrue any debt? How does that work?
Oh,
Is each county
they're
has
not
debt?
us. Illinois, according to Moody's back 2 years ago, they said our debt, you know, when you consider the pension and the retiree health care, was at that time $317 billion. Oregon doesn't have that degree of baggage.
I don't understand though why you feel like the state acquiring the property of that other state would have to acquire the debt of the
Well,
state.
because,
Springfield.
like, for instance, we break away, part of that debt still belongs to New Illinois.
Right.
That pension situation
That would
still
take
belongs,
years and years and years to litigate. And
actually,
you don't have but 5 years before these pensions start to bounce checks.
okay, all I'm trying to say, we have a commitment to not renege on anybody's pension.
Right.
We have a commitment to having a sustainable system. Illinois Policy Institute has a plan that this could be resolved in 5 years. And so I don't want my brother-in-law living in my basement. I don't want him eating out of a dumpster. My cousin is a judge, and he is concerned that he probably won't ever see half of his pension. And so we can, going forward, correct, my husband used to work for Abbott Labs, and some years after he started working there, they said, hey, we're gonna have a 401k now, which was great. And then about a year or two later, they go, oh, and by the way, we're freezing the pension. So everybody got what they had already been promised in the pension. People that were close to retirement, it had no effect on them. But going forward, everything changed. And so you can create a sustainable system and not leave any of your elders eating out of the dumpster.
Dave, you got one of the
The
comments?
legislature should have grandfathered people in years ago, and they haven't done so.
What do you mean?
How is it that we have defined benefits programs nowhere else but in government?
I know.
And then you get paid an amount of money that's not related to reality or investment. It's just a straight up percentage. And you guys haven't done anything about that. You give people this idea that they are entitled to this sort of a retirement. It's not really retirement. It's just a tax on us that are working. That's a good point.
We did do some there were some pension reforms, and we should talk. I'm telling you, I
The
mean,
truth of the matter is you guys will fight tooth and nail to make sure everyone stays in this state to pay whatever debt, because that's how it is. They're leeching off of the people that work to pay the people that don't.
I'm not gonna object to that, but I would like to talk to you about how you think that we could fix the pension problem. I'm willing to.
Where's the finance guy over here?
No,
Talk to the finance guy.
I just heard somebody say it's pretty simple.
It's not that difficult to understand that. You cannot afford it.
I asked you what's the fix, sir. I'm here to talk and listen. Now you're talking hyperbole. I need you to tell me how we can fix it.
Order, please. Order,
Tell
please.
me how we can fix it. I want to help.
401ks?
You don't continue to give people.
I'm listening. What are you saying? What?
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please.
You need to mind your own business and let me talk to him directly.
Guys, come on. Let's take it easy. Let's.
Let me tell you something about LaShawn.
You don't have to defend me. I'm not worried about this. This is fine. I'm here and you're telling me I'm phony? I want to take you to my neighborhood and you show me how real you are. And you know what? I bet you I protect your pensions. Tell me somebody in here that has a pension that would love for it to be diminished. I'm not going to take abuse. Now, I asked you a question. You gave me, you told me it's very simple. I asked you to tell me how we can fix it, and I'll work on it. He wasn't doing it. He just said it's simple. Tell me how you can fix it.
All right, guys. All right.
Let the guy talk.
Why don't you shut up and let him talk?
Here we go.
Guys, come on. Let's cool.
I'm glad too. The heck is wrong with you?
Let's cool down.
Good. Sir, can you tell me how we can fix it?
You cannot continue to guarantee people 8% returns or 10% returns when the investment is not even being put into a market or anything, right? So you switch everybody over who gets hired from now on, or anyone like her husband had at Abbott Lab, over to a 401k moving forward. Those people that were already in the system, they're grandfathered in, and those people that are new starting up should all be told, it's a 401k, you have to contribute.
Okay, that's great. Now, the problem, why don't you mind your business? Let me talk to the constituent here.
Let him finish first.
The problem is the people that have a pension that's already set, we cannot move them and diminish their pension. There's a promise made. You said, what do we do about the people that have already been promised that's really holding the debt? It's not really the new hires that's causing the main problem. It's our obligations to all of the retirees that's really causing taxpayers the problem. We changed the Constitution. Excuse me? We did change our pension system, and I'll go over it with you. There is a change. We changed the tiers. So there are different tiers.
All right, we've at.
You're right. You're right. That's yeah, it does.
All right. Who else has got a question? Serge, you had your hand raised?
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on that, but also I want to thank you all for being here, especially you, Mr. Ford. I mean, this is a tough place to be.
Please put a question at the end, Mark, at the end of this.
I think GH began to talk about a solution. It's not a matter that there's not a solution to the pension problem. There's no will. That's the problem. And we're talking about ways to deal with that. My question is a little bit more general. GH, you mentioned that that this is an urban versus a rural problem. And I wanted to dig down a little bit into that, into the differences between urban values or the values that we're seeing around Chicago and the values of the rest of the state, because I think they're stark and they may be irreconcilable differences. But we have a difference in values, and I can't remember what else I wrote. But if you could speak to that a little bit, I would appreciate that.
Sure. We'll start with Ford. We'll go around.
We sure do have a different values. And I think that if we all share the values of the needs of the people, we'll be better off. You know, I am very happy to say that I live in the Austin community and I'm in a room of a lot of privileged people. And they're complaining about the system not working for them. But I tell you, if you come to my neighborhood where the schools are not like the schools here, it's a different conversation. And so I'm happy to be coming here to talk to everybody, not to fight with you about how we can make the state better, but I'm not going to be abused and attacked when I'm here to help. And I'm telling you, I will come to you and you could give me a solution. I'll file a bill. If you're willing to fight for it, I'll be your champion. We're not going to solve it right here, right now. But where it starts at is a conversation. And name calling just doesn't work.
Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I think might very well be values is probably the essence of why one state wants to divide from another state. Because there's a group of folks that think that there should be more liberal, more lax policies, and there's other folks that think there should be more conservative and more less lax policies. And the way the state is at the moment, where it's dominated, there's a dominant political force that seems to be imposing its social will on the rest of the state. I think actually that's probably more important to most of the people that would like to leave than the financial matters that everybody's beating around. I do believe the financial matters can be resolved. Somebody was talking about Idaho versus Oregon and why somebody, if they take land, why they have to take certain other kinds of things. That's because the Constitution says the legislatures of the two states have to agree on how that works. And so determining debt and dividing up debt and things like that has to be decided by the two legislatures, and that's how that gets done from a legal standpoint. But from a value standpoint, I think it's the value standpoint that in fact is driving these kinds of movements more than the financial standpoint. And you're exactly right. And so I don't even know if it's necessarily urban versus rural as much as I don't know, but it is a values question that's driving that thing, and that's why it'll get cut out along that line. I doubt that it'll get cut out. I know these are important issues that have to be decided relative to the finances, but I think those are probably workable in the end. But the real reason I do think is that there's a whole bunch. Monday we have the Safety Act going into effect, right? Thanks to the Illinois Supreme Court and other kinds of things. There's a whole bundle of people outside of the legislature that don't want cash bail in the state of Illinois. And that's a value judgment on how to run your criminal justice system. Those are the kind of disagreements I think that are at the heart of this kind of thing. And so you're exactly right. That's really more at the heart. I think the financial things can be worked out if you come up to the agreement that these groups of people want to leave. But they want to leave, I think it's a values question.
I just don't know, even if you divide, the borders are still going to be open. And so people could still come across and move to the new state.
Absolutely.
You know, when you said that there's going to be winners and losers, the biggest loser would be the party that's in control of the state, because they've got an ironclad control of the state. And so it goes down to political, right?
Yeah, right.
That's it in a nutshell.
What stands in the way is political, and what actually is the motivating factor is political. The financial stuff can be negotiated.
Of course.
But if you got to come up to it's about, for the folks that are standing in the way, I would suggest to you, it's about maintaining power.
Mr. Bergman, do you want to comment?
Briefly, yes, I guess regarding rural versus urban and values, yes, I think there are differences, but I think within rural there are differences and within urban there are differences. We're not all part of the same system. No. At the end of the day, I'm concerned about special interest groups of whatever stripe and how they control government for their own self-interest, not for the common good. And it happens in rural areas as well as urban areas.
All right.
You're the host.
Directed
Hostess.
at you.
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
Yeah, there's definitely between downstate and Chicago area, there are cultural differences, there are economic differences, there are different needs. And, but the underlying thing for most people in this group has to do with representative government, because Reynolds v. Sims took away any geographic basis for our state legislature, and Everett Dirksen warned that that was going to cause power to be absorbed into the big cities, and that's what happened, and that's why.
GH is referring to a court case from the 1960s. Are you familiar with what they call Reynolds versus Sims generally? Back in before Reynolds versus Sims, many of the states had their state senate to mirror the kind of situation for the United States Senate, where it was based on historical geographic political subdivisions. That is, counties would have senators or other kinds of things like that. But Reynolds versus Sims, the United States Supreme Court sometime in the mid-60s said, no, the United States Senate was an anomaly based on what was necessary to bring the country together and create a constitution and balance the interests of the large states versus the small states. That same kind of consideration does not exist when it comes to the upper house or the Senate of a state legislature. Consequently, state legislative districts, whether they're Senate or representative districts, have to be essentially equal in population and cannot be drawn along historical political subdivisions like counties or towns or other kinds of considerations. And when that happened, I believe at that time there was probably I think it was 100. I don't remember exactly the number, but they had to all the states had to essentially redraw all their districts to take away the political subdivisions. I'm actually doing, as you know, I'm doing some stuff in Georgia at the moment. Georgia has 159 counties, and they had 159 counties based on putting that together for the Georgia Senate to put together the legislative body to balance it out geographically within the state of Georgia. Reynolds versus Sims wiped that all out. That's why there's still 159 counties. And so this is the problem that has arisen because they cannot create representation based on geographic interest, but simply on population numbers. And that's the problem that GH is talking about. And it would take, at this juncture, because it was a Supreme Court case and it was called one man, one vote, was the end result of that case, it would take a constitutional amendment to allow political subdivisions to be represented within the state legislatures, as opposed to strict population numbers that are drawn supposedly contiguous by population, small, compact, and contiguous. You've seen some of the bizarre legislative districts that everybody draws. They're not small, compact, and contiguous, but they are within 2 or 3% of maintaining the population representation. And so that's one of the hearts of the problem, and how big cities come to dominate all these states in their state legislatures, and why people that do not live in the big cities feel they're unrepresented. And there's an argument to be made on a different element of the Constitution. Because within the Constitution, also in Article 4, in a different section, though, it talks about the fact that the Congress shall guarantee to each state a Republican form of government. A Republican form of government, that is with a small r, right? A Republican form of government indicates several things, not the least of which is the rule of law, the representation through a representative body, and a couple other things. And there's an argument to be made that the way this has evolved since Reynolds versus Sims, that we no longer have, for a bunch of people, largely outside of the urban areas, we don't have a Republican form of government, because for all practical purposes, although they get to elect representatives, the representatives, for all practical purposes, in the super minority, have actually no say in what happens. And so that's been the offshoot, the downside of the whole Reynolds versus Sims problem. How that gets resolved, that's another question. But one of the ways it could be resolved is divvying things up in states. And while Shawn says, that there's no borders and people, that's been the beauty of the United States. That is, in fact, been the beauty of the United States, is that people get to vote not only with their ballots, but with their feet.
That's right.
They can vote with their feet. They get to go someplace. If there's a place where they're living and they don't like what the government is, and they've got tired of butting their head up against that wall, fortunately, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, they've been able to leave. So if we were to create a red-blue divide in Illinois, and people move back and forth to where they're most comfortable, I'm kind of thinking that's not a bad idea. And I'm still thinking it's good if we have 4 senators. So.
Regarding small r, small d, big D, et cetera, we have a two-party system in the United States, but I'm afraid it's the Republicans and the Democrats are one party, and the rest of us are another party.
Yeah.
It's so good to be in the conversation, because I don't care what anybody say. When you look at black people and people in rural parts of Illinois, if those two unite, then that's the biggest thing that we can have, because the things that I see when I travel the state, in rural parts of Illinois, the struggles are pretty similar. And yet we tend to allow for not just politics, but our life's upbringing and our beliefs to not want to coexist and work together. I'm telling you, people in rural parts of this state and in rural parts of the country, we should all be uniting, because it's really them against us. And I think we win that way.
I saw a hand in the very, very back a minute ago.
Well, I want to speak to the moving thing, freedom to move. GH and I have something in common. We live in the house that our father and mother built. And I can't pack up my farm, right? And move to St. Louis, or I would have a long time ago. So just a little observation. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. It's not practical all the time, and it's not only not practical, it's not within your heart. I mean,
I would have loved to have lived in St. Louis on my farm.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And LaShawn's right about one thing. Last year, of course, I don't know if anybody knows or pays attention or remembers, but I did run for Illinois Attorney General last year. And I talked to about 30,000 people from down all the way south up to here, and that. Through the good graces of Willie Wilson, I was in any number of black churches doing that, and Hispanic churches and whatnot. And frankly, folks are all the same.
They're the same.
Folks are all the same everywhere for all practical purposes. They want to be safe. They want a roof over their head. They don't want to be taxed out of their homes. They don't want to do that. And so part of this is the power thing in terms of, and maybe that's what's necessary to break up the power structure. You know, as Bill says, there's not, yeah, there's like not necessarily red and blue people in charge. There's just the people in charge, you know, and they kind of, I've often put that together and compared it to like worldwide wrestling. You know, the guys over here, yeah, I'm going to go kick his butt. No, yeah, I'm going to kick his butt. And then they go in the back room and they divvy up the money,
theater,
right?
Yep.
You know, you see the competing press conferences. Yeah, you see the competing press conferences they have on Capitol Hill, and they yell at each other and back and forth, and then they go. It's not the same as when, say, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill would have a glass of whiskey, but it's but because they were getting together to do things for us. There's so many folks in charge that are getting together to do things to us, and maybe one of the ways to do that is, in fact, to at least effectively move toward breaking things up. The Constitution's been amended 27 times. About 8 or 10 of those times have been because the United States Constitution, because people were advocating for those kinds of things, whether it was women's right to vote or whether or not it was the situation for the 18-year-old vote and other kinds of things. People were agitating for that, and the reason that the Congress acted was to shut the people up. Okay, and one of the ways you can move this forward is to continue agitating. You can continue. I call it agitation, or let's call it education. I'm certainly informed of how it works out. The details, hell, I don't know. But I do know that people don't know the Constitution, education. I'm going out to Morrison, Illinois, giving a talk on Constitution Day tomorrow. You know, and that's become my mission since I think I told that story. But that's become my mission for a long time. And you know what? It should be your mission too. It should be everybody's mission. It should be everybody's mission. And I will also tell you that there's one other thing. They make us all memorize the preamble, right? Yeah. You know, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the wrong 58 words. They're the wrong 58 words. The right 55 words are: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that governments are instituted among men to secure these rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's who we are. It was defined. And if you knew those 55 words and you told everybody else to learn those 55 words, the ability to slice us and dice us would freaking disappear. Because that's what it means to be an American, and that's what it was on the first day. And I suggest to you, this is part of the education process. And I'm sorry, I'm going off, but tomorrow's Constitution Day, okay? You know, tomorrow is Constitution Day, but there is no Constitution without the Declaration of Independence, and I'll shut up.
Anybody else want to comment on any of that? All right. We'll take a couple more questions. Let's get Marty over here, and we'll go back to this gentleman.
Kudos for helping to put this on, Justin.
Oh, thanks.
So just to
Come on out,
Representative Ford, so we got a problem with the loss of population in this state. It's getting worse. And the last couple of years, I don't know how many people have come up to me and say, you know, I'm thinking of leaving, or what's your plans? So I just think this is an issue that's getting worse and worse. And I was just wondering, I think I know the answer, but I mean, is there anything going on in General Assembly saying, let's form a commission or a committee, bipartisan, figure out this problem? Why are we losing so many people? Because we're losing billions in tax base, and it's just going to get worse and worse.
That is there's no commission to try to save the population, and that's a good idea. I'll work with you on that. That's good. Because then we'll know why people are leaving, all that.
My daughter just moved to Indiana. My youngest daughter, she said, "Dad, I can't pay taxes, I can't pay the rent. I mean, it's gonna be so much better for me in Indiana.
I
And,
know several people that did that.
and then she let me know that all of the gas stations on the border are, on the Illinois side, are dying. She goes, everybody from Illinois is coming into Indiana and buying their gas, and not only gas, but they're buying their food and their drinks and whatever else, and all that money is just flowing right out of Illinois.
Build the wall.
Build the wall.
All right. Sir, you had a question?
Yeah, I kind of hesitated to ask this, but this is something that's been mulling over in my mind. Maybe it's a better first step, but it's sort of a different path forward. I think we're all familiar with the Convention of States concept, the 5th article of the Constitution. Are any of you aware of any state that has similar Convention of Counties? And Mr. Ford, would you support a resolution to amend our Constitution to add such a provision for a Convention of Counties? Because I think it's been said before that I think the problem is that much of the state does not believe they're represented in Springfield. And a Convention of Counties would bypass the state legislature and the governor's office and take the power directly to the people through the county governments.
Would that be a resolution on a ballot initiative?
A resolution to discuss, to bring up.
Yeah, he would better. I don't know what I would discuss.
You're asking, yeah, but what you're talking about is something that would, in fact, again, require an amendment to the Illinois Constitution. It's not just a simple resolution. It would require an amendment to the Illinois Constitution. And the Illinois Constitution, by the way, is probably the worst. All due respect to, no, not you. No, we have a friend in common that was a delegate to the 1970 Constitutional
Oh, was that
Convention.
Mike Mann?
No, but the Illinois Constitution only allows for the people to propose an amendment if it has to do with the structure of the legislature. Any other kind of amendment to the Illinois Constitution has to come from the legislature. And that is one of the huge failings of the 1970 Illinois Constitution. We essentially, what you're saying is a wonderful idea, but we'd have to get, I think, 2/3 of both houses
And it has to go on the ballot.
of the legislature to propose such a thing, to go on the ballot. And actually, I'm involved in some litigation where I don't think Amendment 1 passed legally. I'm involved in helping some people in Lake County on some litigation with that. And we can talk about that some other time. But the fact is the Illinois Constitution cannot be amended just by the people. It has to have the legislature. So the folks that wrote that did more to secure the power of the folks in Springfield. So they've structurally secured the power. Yes, sir. Is that, I'm sorry, you got to follow up?
No, I was just going to say that any of these proposals are going to require action by the state legislature.
Yeah, unless you got a really clever lawyer that can pretend it changes the legislature somehow. And right now, the Illinois Supreme Court hasn't paid attention to the Illinois Constitution in 50 years. You know.
So to answer your question, I don't know if I would support it, but I'm willing to talk about whether or not it's something that. Look, I want what's good for Illinois. I want what's good for my family and for the future. So if it means breaking from what is normal, I'm willing to do it, but it's got to work.
In an effort to find common ground, the 50 states are all incubators, right? We look at the 50 states as incubators. Well, we can do the same with the 102 counties in Illinois. Where are things being done better than elsewhere? And what can we do?
Yeah, you know, talk to Jim Mendrick about that. The sheriff of DuPage County is just a wonderful, wonderful man. I've become a good friend of his. But the fact is they had things set up where, in fact, they only had about a 15% recidivism rate of people that were going into DuPage County Jail, because they had training programs. They had doctors that would come and remove gang tattoos. They had a situation where they had a farm that was built, and they were teaching people skills, welding, and helping them get CDL driver's licenses. Now, with the Safety Act, as soon as somebody comes into the jail, they get kicked out of the jail, and all the good work that was happening in DuPage County is going out the window. And the problem turned out to be that they tried to make the rest of the state like Cook County instead of trying to make the state like DuPage. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I've been with that. Not you personal. Not you personal. I got my own issues with Kim Fox. We'll talk about Kim Fox someday.
We got to talk about the law, and I don't want you guys to leave misinformed. So keep going.
Yeah. Okay. But the fact is that it was a change in the law that destroyed all the good work that was going on in a county, as opposed to going and saying, "Geez, this is good. Why don't we try and model other things after that?" But what they did is they took it and destroyed this other stuff. So what's actually happening in many respects is going in reverse of what you're suggesting. I'm sorry, I didn't call you out.
No, you didn't.
Thank you. Regarding states as laboratories, et cetera, the lab rats, I guess, are escaping. That's one in Illinois. And one of the lessons is that looking across the 50 states, you can look at the 50 states as laboratories. And when you look at the states that are in bad shape financially, the ones that are at the bottom, Illinois, Connecticut, New Jersey, others, they tend to have one thing in common. That's strong, organized labor power within the legislature. And it's very curious why we have such poorly funded retirement obligations for government workers in a state where labor is so important. And I'm afraid it's because they were powerful enough to get A, the promise, that's what they cared about, and then B, the guarantee. And at the same time, why didn't they bargain collectively for better funding for the plans over the last few decades? And they didn't. So that's why I'm open to more draconian possible solutions, including bankruptcy or the equivalent thereof at the state level.
All right, we've probably got time for one more question.
I have a question, but to your point about this is what Shawn Thompson talks about all the time. You're going to your abuser to ask for their help. So are you asking, I thank you for being here, I'm not taking out on you. I'm saying, for decades, this legislature has had not our interests in mind or in heart.
It doesn't work.
So there's a thing called tactical civics. You look online, tacticalcivics.com. You guys already addressed this? No? So they have this, you're teaching it?
No, I said they're teaching.
Yeah, they're teaching people on a county by county basis, because it's in the US Constitution that the power belongs to the people, and the people can organize grand juries. You don't have to wait for Cook County to have a grand jury. You and people in your county can put one together and hold the legislative people responsible for their actions and their votes. And
Sounds like common law.
So this has already been going on in, I think they've got chapters in over 200 or 300 counties. There's like 1,700 counties in the whole United States, something like that, right? But they've got already like 300 or 400 chapters already started.
There's some in Illinois too, down south.
I'm not
And that's your way of getting power
I'm not
back to the
suggesting
people.
that any positive change is going to happen until we take back control of our legislature.
And that will.
And the only
you can
alternative-
change the legislature by getting rid of the people that are causing the problem in this manner.
But the alternative until then is to leave the state. That's the only.
And that's the alternative that folks are addressing here today. And these folks are doing some great things. I just want to give you some background that this man won't give you about something, about his own personal political history, and that we are blessed to have him in the legislature. He ran three times against the machine in primaries, and he battled them three times in his own district. 3 times before he ultimately beat the Democrat machine. He was never endorsed by the Democrat Party as their candidate for the state legislature when he was originally running for it. And I will also say that during the course, it's public record, okay?
Yeah.
You don't mind me?
No, tell anything.
It's public record. He was the subject of political persecution as a result of him running against the machine. He was, in fact, indicted for several income tax felonies.
17 counts.
17 counts. 17 counts of income tax felonies indicted by, the Obama Justice Department.
You're lucky you're not in jail.
And through the good graces of a variety of things, somewhere along the line they said, oops, never mind. And so when this guy to be in the state legislature has actually literally fought a battle, a personal battle, that people have no idea what he went through to be able to represent the people of the state of Illinois. And he does a fair balancing job of that. We clearly don't agree on a whole lot of things. And he represents his constituents the way they are supposed to do. But it's worth knowing a little bit about the man's personal political history, that he ran against the machine several times, and in return for doing that, they tried to throw him in prison. They tried to throw him in prison for doing that. And I think he deserves all our thanks for having fought through that and still coming forward. And so I know that's not on the subject today, but when I see things, people should know stuff about it. Folks.
I appreciate that. And you know what's most important about things like this? Me being here, I'm going to go into the caucus. And trust me, what you've said to me is here and here. And I'm going to say things that I've learned from you, which will help in the process. Everything takes time. There's no doubt. We got into a fight here. That's great. I'm glad that we were able to fight and get over it. But I take it to heart because I do listen. And I will say things that you've said to me, to the speaker, to the president, and to my caucus, the Democratic caucus, because that's why I'm here.
Why are you still a Democrat?
You know, because I can't get you to be a Democrat. We want to switch? I would really love to have, it would be easier for us to work together. Let me tell you one reason why a Democrat. Are the Democrats very beneficial to black people?
No.
All right, and so I would say that when we look at the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party, I think I might have a better shot at fighting for survival. Because the simple notion of let's forget about the past and you just arrive where you're at today and survive, that's called pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's a problem. It's really a problem when we have a mindset like that. We have a mindset that's focused on repealing civil rights. That's a big deal, to repeal things that have made your life as a woman, my life as a black man, better. And there's a party that says we need to repeal some of that stuff. I can't be a part of that. For example, affirmative action.
You know what? That's all different debate.
Yeah.
Different debate. We need to wrap it up.
A women's right to choose. These things are very important to a person. And when you talk about...
Choose at any point?
Oh, that's a different story.
We need to wind it down. Wind it down.
All right, I got a couple of books. Everybody's interested.
Wait, I still had a question. And I wanted to say something about with Shawn Ford that people might think this is interesting. I just had found out a few months ago that there's a law in Illinois that you can't, if it's 0 degrees out, you can't go out and start your car and let it warm up.
Correct.
A lot of people like myself don't have a remote starter. But anyway, one day, and he shall remain nameless, a state legislator was saying, oh, this is such a stupid law. It's the nanny state, blah, blah, blah. Well, I went and looked it up. I guess it had been so long ago he didn't realize he'd voted for it. But it was a unanimous vote for that except for you. You were the only one that voted no. But I did have a question. New Illinois, basically, we are a state-split organization. Under that umbrella, we talk about representative government, government corruption, and our state's fiscal catastrophe. And so we don't generally take positions on any issues. Doesn't matter how much our members feel strongly about it, because we trust should we become our own state? The people will decide. But there is one position that we have taken, and that's on universal school choice. And in our legislature, there's a minuscule program they invest in kids, and they want to get rid of that. But I was talking to an African-American gentleman on the phone one day because he was very interested in New Illinois, and he says, you know, half the black families in Chicago are going to move to New Illinois if you have universal school choice. And yet, I think that as someone in the legislature and someone who's from Chicago, you have the Chicago Teachers Union. So I'm just wondering how that issue works out for you.
Yeah, that's one of the issues that I think that I have problems with my party, because I actually went to Catholic schools from K through all the way to college. Then I went to the seminary to be a priest for a year. So I believe that people should have a right to go to a private Catholic school if that's what their parents want. And it is troubling because the party says that you should have one choice. And I'm working with the General Assembly to see if we could fix the all kids so that that could work. I hope that we can make the fixes that's necessary, because there's no tax dollars that's being diverted from the fund. And so hopefully it'll work. I mean, I'm for parents getting their children out of poverty. And the way you get out of poverty is to have a high quality education. And some communities, it's not possible in some of those schools. So that's a tough one. And you guys, all of you guys are Republicans. You can't pull a ballot for me. So you ain't gonna be able to help me. I'm gonna be fighting by myself. You're gonna get me in trouble, but that's one thing that I would tell you, that I really hope that we can figure out a way that children have a right to get their needs met in Illinois. Yeah, I voted for it. Yeah.
All right. Let's thank our panelists, LaShawn Ford.
Thank you.
Dave Shestokas. Bill Bergman. Thank you, audience, for being here. Thank you for your passion. Thank you, GH, for helping me put this together. Thanks, Brad, for recording this. And thank you, Bean, for as well. Thank you, Westchester Library.
I got books.
David's got books. Again, thank you so much.
Nice to meet you. Say hello.
Here you go, sir.
Can I collect your microphone, sir?
Oh, certainly.
You had a microphone?
Okay.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Let me sit over here.